The end. Naomi Stewart. Cold wind ripped around him, and he tightened his hold on his cloak, cursing. He hated being close to other people, and he hated being forced to accept the miserable shelter of others. Oren hated it all. Hated life itself, the very thing he so desperately clung on to. The huddle of people was the only landmark for miles. Distantly, a mountain peevishly glared at them, seeming to curse them as much as the barren desert and stormy sky did. Another sandy sweep of wind attacked his face, and Oren swore as the shield of warm bodies around him dispersed and drew away. He glared, then started. 2 men stood in the group, who had certainly not been there before, and Oren suspiciously drew away with the rest of the crowd. The 2 strangers did nothing but stand in silence, their hoods pulled around their faces. Gradually the crowd regathered, leaving the strangers to stand off to the side. Time did not fly by, nor inch along as they waited. It simply was. Oren glanced distrustfully at the strangers, unsure of what to think. One was clothed in rags, each layer of clothing seeming ready to fall off his body. Only the copious amount of tattered layers he had on seemed sufficient to cover his thin frame. The other man was taller and clothed in a clean, new cloak. More waiting, with sore feet and a sore back and sore sores. How long would it be before the next disaster? Oren was too used to running. From nature, from God, from friends. After some time, the group began to settle onto the ground. Oren followed suit and pulled out his dilapidated kettle. He looked in and scowled at his meager remnant of water, then plucked a thorny plant from the dusty ground and broke the leaves into the vessel. Someone started a fire, and Oren settled his treasure into the coals to steep. He gazed into the flickering flames as his tea brewed. Perhaps he shouldn't have tried so hard to escape death each time disaster swung its fist. It would have been a quicker end than dehydration. Oren wrapped a corner of his cloak around his hand and then pulled the kettle out from the coals. He was drinking the steaming tea when a hand brushed his shoulder, and he found himself spluttering all over the fire. Its weak flames extinguished with a pitiful hiss. "Apologies, friend," said the man to whom the hand belonged. Oren turned to find the stranger with the fine, clean cloak smiling at him. Oren shrank away. "What do you want?" The man sat down next to him. "I don't want anything, friend. I just wondered if I could help." He threw back his hood, revealing a defined face and a shock of blonde hair. He drew a loaf of bread from inside his cloak. "Would you like some?" The people around him eyed the loaf. Oren shifted uncomfortably. "Even he don't want it, I'll take it," said another man. Oren snatched at the loaf. "No, I'll keep it," he growled. "There's plenty for everyone," said the stranger soothingly. "Don't see how," muttered Oren. The man pulled out another loaf of bread. "Here," he said, breaking it in half and handing one piece to the vagabond who had piped up. "That's only half," whined the man. He leaned forward to grab at the other piece, only to start with surprise when he noticed the whole loaf in his hands. "As I said," said the stranger, "plenty for everyone." He split his half again and handed out another whole loaf, and split it again and gave another. Hard as Oren looked, he couldn't figure out where all the bread was coming from. As Oren ate his bread, his stomach filled with a feeling of triumph. He had forgotten what it was to feel satisfied in his belly, and his soul leaped, hungry to possess the power the stranger held. To never go hungry again? To always have the power to be satisfied? That was something Oren suddenly desired more than anything. "Man does not live on bread alone," said a hoarse voice behind him. Oren jumped and shoved the rest of his bread into his mouth, so as to ensure his possession of it. He turned to find the ragged stranger standing next to him. "What else does he live on?" said the first stranger, still passing out bread. "Water," said the hoarse voice again. "Ah." The red man paused, then glanced at the stingy clouds overhead. "Perhaps I can help with that." With a gentle rumble, the sky overhead released a torrent of rain, and the silence of the moment was broken as the people screamed and cried for water. Stumbling to his feet, Orrin grasped his little kettle and held it upwards, water hitting his face and trickling into his mouth and dripping down through his layers of clothing to his skin. "Water," he croaked. "Water!" He drank till he was satisfied, and then some, before the rain ceased. Orrin turned to the man who had called down the rain from the skies. "Who are you?" The man cocked his head. "You may call me Prince." The ragged man pulled off his hood, revealing dark skin and a crooked nose. "Prince of what?" "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again." Prince looked away from the piercing gaze, and Orrin shifted uncomfortably. Then the waiting continued. Fatigue came upon Orrin. Night did not. Night never came any more. Even night and day had abandoned them. He slept, and woke, and made more tea, and drank more tea, and sat silently, brooding. Prince and the stranger sat in silence. Finally, Orrin turned to Prince. "Why'd you come?" Prince turned to him and blinked. "You are stuck. You need an escape? I have come to show you the way out." The ragged stranger snorted. Orrin glanced at him and then away from the labyrinth of thin scars covering his face. "Prince has come to take you somewhere," the ragged stranger said dryly. "But I can assure you it's nowhere you would like to go." Prince shrugged. "What do you think, Orrin? Do you think I could take you from this torture to somewhere better?" Orrin didn't answer. The sharp winds began to blow again, sending little grains of sand digging into Orrin's face like needles, and the people huddled together again, trying to shield themselves. Only the two men seemed unaffected. When the wind died down, Prince spoke to them. "I can take you out of this place," he said. The ragged man laughed hoarsely. "What proof do you offer of your claim?" Prince's eyes flashed dangerously. "Power speaks for itself. Could you do better?" The stranger raised one eyebrow, then turned to the crowd. "I wait to show my power, but I can take you to an eternity filled with joy." A trembling woman spoke up from the crowd. "What payment do you each require?" "Nothing," said Prince. "My gift is free." "Everything," said the ragged man. "I have paid for it already." The crowd shifted with unease. Unmeasurable moments later, Orrin looked up to see a nightmare coming to life. He had never before felt fear, like when the air began to buzz with electricity and when the distant horizon began to crack and split down the center. The earth rumbled in pain as the gap in the earth grew in size and the crevice began to rapidly creep towards the waiting crowd. The ragged man stood. Raindrops finally began to fall from the looming clouds, and each one stood out on his greasy black hair. "Choose!" he shouted over the din. "Choose now! No more waiting!" The people wailed and turned to their choices for safety. Prince lifted his arms to the sky and shouted. White light blazed from his face and body and hands, and streams of warmth seemed to envelop the people. "Choose!" he bellowed. "Choose!" In that moment, Orrin knew that Prince had power. If Orrin had learned one thing through this disaster, it was that power saved. Orrin stumbled forward. He reached Prince and fell on his knees. "Save me, my God," he gasped. Another man grasped Prince's tunic, weeping. "Forgive me." The chasm splitting the very earth in half grew closer, and more people joined Prince, turning their faces toward the light. Only a few turned to the ragged man, who met them with open arms. Suddenly, The chaos grew sevenfold as a white line appeared on the horizon, rapidly growing larger and larger. "It's the sea!" screamed a woman. "Save me, Lord!" gasped Orin, grasping Prince's cloak in desperation. But a change was taking place. As the wind ripped Prince's hair around his face, his eyes darkened, and his tongue grew long and forked, hissing with hate and fear. "It's over," echoed the ragged man's voice over the din. "It is finished." He cradled his few followers close, but he was no longer ragged or darkened by dirt. A light sprung up around his face, and as his cuts bled onto his dirty rags, they turned to white. The perfect tunic in Orin's hands grew decimated as Prince writhed in hatred. Chains appeared around Prince's feet, and Orin screamed as the chains reached out toward him. The wave crashed closer, white foam hungrily leaping forward. The chains wrapped around Orin and the crowd like choking vines. As the crest of the wave reached them, towering high in the sky, Prince crumbled into dust. Orin was powerless. As the wave hung for just a second, ready to plummet, Orin caught out of the corner of his eye the ragged man becoming enveloped in light. And as he spread his arms over his followers and held them close, they disappeared in a flash of light. And then the wave crashed.